So, how do you build a stable country out of complete and utter chaos? Well, in the late 19th century, Spain gave it a shot with a really bold political experiment. They designed this whole system meant to guarantee peace and order. But as we're about to see, the very machine they built to create stability, well, it ended up engineering its own spectacular collapse.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute mess that made this whole thing necessary in the first place. Then we'll look at how the monarchy made its comeback, and we'll really unpack the political machinery they built. And finally, we'll watch the cracks start to show and see how it all came tumbling down.
Okay, so to really get why this system was even a thing, you have to understand the sheer, unfiltered chaos of what came right before it, the First Spanish Republic, a government that, get this, barely even lasted a year.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The political situation was so unstable that the presidency was basically a revolving door. One of the presidents, a guy named Estanislao Figueres, literally just gave up and fled to France. He said he couldn't take it anymore. This wasn't a functional government, it was just a crisis in constant motion. And you know, when your politics are that much of a disaster, your economy is going to follow. By the summer of '73, the government had to admit it was looking at a deficit of 500 million pesetas. That's a mind-boggling amount of money back then. The country was, for all intents and purposes, bankrupt, all while trying to pay for multiple wars. So you've got this perfect storm. There's a massive civil war, the Third Carlist War, raging up north. At the same time, a brutal colonial war in Cuba is just sucking up money and resources. And if that wasn't enough, the country was literally splintering apart, with different regions declaring themselves independent countries or cantons. The whole thing finally imploded when a general just marched his troops into parliament and sent everyone home. Total, absolute freefall. So, faced with this complete breakdown, the powerful people in the country, the elites, they looked around and turned to the one institution they thought could put a lid on the chaos, the monarchy. A plan was set in motion to bring back the old dynasty and shut the door on the whole Republican experiment. And man, when the end came, it came fast. This all went down in less than a year. In January, a coup basically puts the Republic on life support. By December, the heir to the throne, Prince Alfonso, lays out his plan from exile. And then, just 28 days later, another general just decides he's waited long enough and declares Alfonso the new king. Just like that, the Republic was gone. But here's where it gets really interesting, because there was this major tension going on behind the scenes. The political mastermind of this whole thing, Cánovas del Castillo, he wanted a smooth, political, civilian-led process. He knew that for this to last, you needed people to buy in, not just be forced into it. But the army got impatient, they jumped the gun and just did it themselves, which meant that right from day one, this new system was guilty of the very thing it was supposed to prevent, military intervention in politics. Not a great sign. All right, so the king, Alfonso XII, is back on the throne. Now, Cánovas can finally build his masterpiece, a political system designed for one thing and one thing only: stability. No more chaos, no more coups. The absolute heart of this new system was something called the turno pacífico, which means the peaceful turn. The idea was actually pretty clever on the surface. You've got your two main parties, the conservatives and the liberals, and instead of fighting each other tooth and nail for power, they just agreed to take turns. Seriously, it was a prearranged rotation of power, all designed to keep things calm and predictable. Which, of course, raises a pretty obvious question, right? I mean, if you're going to decide who wins the election before anyone even votes, how do you make sure the results actually match your plan? How do you guarantee that every single time? Well, the answer, and this is the dirty little secret of the whole system, was something called caciquismo. This was basically a massive nationwide system of organized election fraud. Out in the countryside, you had these powerful local bosses called caciques. And when the government in Madrid decided it was time to change parties, the word would go out to these guys and they would deliver the votes. They'd use threats, bribes, maybe a ballot box from the wrong town would mysteriously go missing, whatever it took to make sure the right person won. It was stability, all right, but it was completely fake. Yeah. But here's the thing about a system that's so artificial, so rigid. It was basically designed for a world that was already starting to disappear. And while it could manufacture peace for a little while, it was way too brittle to handle any real pressure from the outside world. The cracks were bound to appear. And the hits just kept on coming, one after another. First, in 1898, you have the disaster. Spain gets humiliated in the Spanish-American War and loses its last major colonies. It's a national gut punch. Then, a few years later, you get the tragic week, a massive, violent uprising in Barcelona over the war in Morocco. And finally, the ultimate blow, a catastrophic military defeat in Morocco in 1921 that just shattered any remaining faith in the government or the army. Each one of these crises was like a hammer blow to a system that was already cracking. And at the very same time, this closed-off little system was creating its own enemies. It had absolutely no room for all the new, powerful movements that were bubbling up all over Spain. You had Republicans, socialists, anarchists, regional nationalists. And these groups, they weren't interested in playing the game. They weren't asking for a turn. They wanted to tear the whole system down and start over. So you've got crisis after crisis on the outside, and all these powerful new enemies on the inside. The monarchy was backed into a corner, and it made one last disastrous gamble. It threw its own system under the bus and tied its fate to a military dictator. So in 1923, this general, Primo de Rivera, comes along and says, the problem isn't the army, it's not the king. It's the politicians and this whole broken parliamentary system. He launches a coup, and in that critical moment, King Alfonso XIII threw his full support behind him. It was a desperate move, for sure, but the king clearly thought it was the only way to save his own skin. And that single decision kicked off a fatal domino effect. The dictatorship, it turns out, was a disaster. It went bankrupt and eventually collapsed. But by then, the damage was done. The king was now forever linked to this failed dictatorship. His legitimacy was shot. So when some local elections were held in 1931, they basically turned into a vote on the monarchy itself. The Republican parties won in all the big cities, and the message couldn't have been clearer. 2 days later, the king packed his bags and fled the country. So just think about the incredible irony here. This grand experiment, this system designed from the ground up to guarantee stability and prevent revolution, ended up being so brittle and so fake that its collapse led directly to a revolution and brought the entire monarchy down with it. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it? What is the real price of stability? And can any system, no matter how clever it is, ever truly last if it comes at the expense of genuine, messy, unpredictable democracy?